Hello, everybody. We're here for the last time. Last time, but not the least time, because we're here to do the conclusion of Varieties of Religious Experience and the Postscript. So,
Postscript's gonna be wild.
Postscript is pretty intense. So, it's the final chapter. What do you think?
It was a good wrap up. It wraps up, but then you also get his take on a lot of stuff. So it's definitely worth the read, and it adds a lot to everything that he was saying before, and so it pulls a lot from that and it adds a lot to it. So I think it's definitely a very strong conclusion to the book.
Mm-hmm. And all the things that he's a little bit looser on before, and he's saying like, oh, I'm not exactly talking about this, and I'm not claiming this, I'm just saying this. All of those like half statements, all the statements in this chapter are not pretty full state. He tells you what he's making claims on and what he's not making claims on pretty clearly here. So it's much easier to tell what he's thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, so he just starts summarizing the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got that, like, the visible world is like, or religions see the visible world as being part of the spiritual world, and it draws significance from the spiritual world. And like harmony with the universe, including the spiritual world as part of it, is our chief end. And that, prayer is our chief mean of action to achieve things spiritually, which I think is true. But I thought it was kind of interesting that he only started kind of like bringing home his ideas of prayer in the last chapter in the other topics, and then he assigns it like such an important part here. It might have been nice to get something more on that. Maybe in saintliness it would have fit in
The
better.
saintliness chapter was a lot of prayer stuff, but
but it just wasn't directly that. And then he says that like religion adds zest and depth to life, and religious observers typically have a heightened sense of peace, love, security, that kind of thing. So there are definitely visible changes that are occurring in people who are spiritual as opposed to non-spiritual.
Yeah,
at least what you should observe. Yeah.
And it's at least saying it's not like a flippant thing. And he had a really good way of making religious experience both normal to the sense that you have to believe it, but not that it sort of profanes it, or not that it sort of makes it irrelevant or uninteresting. It still remains the same glory, but he normalizes it to the degree that normal things become spiritual things.
Spiritual, yeah.
And so, like, in one of his essays that I'm going to do a video on soon, it's the next chapter in Will to Believe, called "Is Life Worth Living?" He says the way that I want you to think about the unseen spiritual order is the way that dogs look at human like society, because they're definitely a part of it and affected by it, and do in their own little ways affect it, right?
Yeah.
But they clearly don't understand it in the same way, and we should think of ourselves as dogs to this higher. Not that we have like, even the distance between us and dogs might be greater than distance between us and angels or something, but it's the same kind of difference. We're higher on the hierarchy, and then angels are higher than us.
Yeah. And it's a very real difference. And so even though it's something that everyone can partake in and participates in, there are definitely like less spiritual people, more spiritual people, and there is some kind of real and actual difference between partaking in that spiritual aspect of life and not partaking in it.
Yeah. Then he starts talking about stuff that makes him seem more like hippie, but and he talks about, people's religions don't need to be the same thing. Everyone can have their own religion, but it's not clear what he really means by that, right? because a big theme of the whole book is, well, some people are sick-souled and some people are healthy-minded. So healthy-minded people don't need to go through this certain kind of. He says something like quite specific, actually, about what healthy-minded and sick-souled people might need to do. But you may now ask, would not this one-sidedness be cured if we should just all? Oh no, that's not it. If we are sick souls, we require a religion of deliverance. But why think so much of deliverance if we are healthy-minded? Unquestionably, some men have the completer experience and the higher vocation here, just as in the social world. But for each man to stay in his own experience, whatever it be, for others to tolerate him there is surely best. So I guess he's saying to some extent, it's not so much that everyone has their own private truth, but that it's not always the best idea to try to coerce someone out of their way of thinking, even if you think that your beliefs are true somehow.
And so he talks about how people have like different difficulties, and so you're going to have different solutions to their problems. But I think he doesn't really address how some religions can incorporate like solutions to multiple problems within them. So like within like Catholicism or Orthodoxy, you have like a wide variety of things that you can do to participate within it. So you've got like monastic orders, which are for people who like need that solitude of that like ingrained spiritual community. And so you have different kind of pockets within Orthodoxy or within Catholicism that can meet the different needs for different types of people. And so I think his idea that you can have you need a different religion for a different problem is a more like Protestant idea of where like when you don't mesh with the current church that you're in, you can kind of like split off and start your own church. Yeah. But I think that there are definitely within Christianity, you have things that address a sick-souled person and a healthy-minded person, something for the extrovert and the introvert, and you know, wild like varieties of people. And so I think he's right in that you have to address different problems for different kind of people spiritually and their different temperaments. But I think that doesn't necessarily have to be a completely divergent religion or denomination even.
Yeah, but that seems to be seemed to be the fad at the time of how things got done. And I'm sure that he would, because he also dabbled in like seances and stuff. He would go to seances, and his wife was like really into it. And there was this one woman in Boston who was like the famous, like she's also independently famous, and he was friends with her. It was very popular at the time, actually, among like elites to kind of go around and be like, oh yeah, we're going to talk to my uncle today, you know.
Yeah.
And they would do that. And so that's also probably like what he's kind of hinting at here too. So I don't know. There's a lot of kind of shifty things here. But,
was he around? Was he around during the Second Great Awakening?
Which would that be?
Let me just look.
Are you talking? Is that more like 20th century or 19th century?
That was 19th century. No, that was earlier.
Okay.
Never mind. Because I know that out of the Second Great Awakening, you had a lot of the birth of a lot of new denominations out of it, and so that could have been, you know, something.
Maybe his dad was Henry James Sr. Well, Henry, is it Henry? Yeah, Henry. Henry James, his brother, is also a famous author.
Oh, really?
So yeah, and he's into, like, my mom had heard of him, but he's also into. I don't think he doesn't have a Nobel Prize in literature. I don't think so. If he did, that'd be crazy. And he had another brother who died in the Civil War.
Oh wow.
North. And he had a sister too. I don't know why. And he had kids, and he had a cousin too.
Yeah. He had a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Let me have this quote here. The divine can mean no single quality. It must mean a group of qualities by being champions of which in alteration different men may all find worthy missions, each attitude being a syllable in human nature's total message. It takes the whole of us to spell out the meaning or spell the meaning out completely. And so this
Mm-hmm.
is like, it reminded me of like Paul talking about the body of Christ and how everyone's a different part. He uses, a meaning and different syllables, but
Yeah.
I took it to be like similar to that.
Yeah, that's great. And this is a lot of what I've been thinking about too with respect to politics, where sometimes you just need like Smith talks about it. There's a section in Theory of Moral Sentiments. I've probably talked about this elsewhere. I wrote an article about it before, where there's people that are there that have the sentiment to defend the way that things are, and people that have the sentiment to change things. And
Yeah.
it says, how would the impartial spectator deal with these kind of people? And he says it's a case-by-case basis kind of thing, but you need both. Both are proper sentiments.
Yeah.
And how can both two contradictory things be proper? The one that's always out there to look for the problems, and the one that's there to, almost instinctively stick with the status quo. And you need two different types of people both doing you need, if the truth is contradictory with itself, you need more than one person to divide up the mental labor.
Yeah.
Do both halves, and you live out both halves. And as long as you can integrate somehow in a larger mission of the truth or something like that, then that's the only way that you can actually solve that problem.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's kind of like what Peterson talks about with, like, you had the order of like your culture that you grew up in, but then you had the chaos of like new things, and so you need the order and stability of your culture and the status quo, but then you also need chaos to be introduced to drive out like the old and tyrannical aspects of your culture that aren't like up to date. And so you need that like constant tension between the order that you have from culture and the status quo, but then that chaos of new things introducing to like keep things up to date and improving with the times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Pajot just came out with a new image that he drew, and he made a video explaining the image too. He's trying to incorporate all of reality into one image, and it's got fringes and Jesus in the middle as order, as the center of an order that sustains itself.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and then he starts to clarify what he means by the science of religions. There was some quote in here that I wanted to send to Paul Vanderclay, but maybe I'll try to find it. But yeah, so he had this idea of the science of religions, where we're gonna like put all the religions next to each other and have them run a race and see what they do to people. But he says it's not. So someone that like wants to be more scientific or be more grounded and not have to have faith like him says like, okay, well, we'll just do this. If it's true that there is a spiritual world, we'll just start doing science of religion, and then we don't need to have all these faith things. And then he says, no, that's not exactly what it is, because all I've done in this whole book is watch people, but I haven't lived it myself. And the living yourself requires faith, and that's more what he talks about in The Will to Believe.
Yeah.
And it's important to science of religion can teach you what religion is, but not exactly what it's like.
Yeah.
To believe it, or
he
how
uses,
to believe it.
Yeah. So he says that like knowledge of a thing is not a thing in itself, and then brings back a quote from an earlier chapter that understanding the science behind and like the medical physiology of being drunk does not let you know what it's like to be drunk. You don't knowing everything that you can about drunkenness does not prepare you for drinking alcohol. And so the knowledge about something is distinct from like the experience of the thing. and the knowledge that you get from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is one of the areas where he's more clear about what he means by something. He doesn't think that.
Yeah.
And this is in the preface to Will to Believe too. And in the preface there, it seems almost like he's saying we should take on science of religion as a new religion. But he also clarifies it more where he says everyone should keep their own private religion and then have tolerance for one another, and then the society as a whole will play out and and come and start showing the truth. But yeah, but then he starts talking about people seeing religion as atavistic and just a primitive forms of thinking showing themselves up again. Like, why do we need it? We're all familiar with this kind of thing, and this is really wrapped up in the just personalizing things, I think, really.
Yeah.
And anthropomorphizing the things in the world.
Yeah.
And I don't know, because science from the outside, because the way that we think about it is, okay, well, the way that we look at trees now, and the way that we look at rocks, and the way that we look at the sun, is all depersonalized, and we look at them as laws and stuff like that. And then when people start looking at people, they start to look at them under the same kinds of laws and such. So, are you going to depersonalize people now? Sometimes people do, but then they can't actively fully do that. The only they want to, by trying to be more scientific, they ended up de-anthropomorphizing anthropomorphs.
Yeah.
Anthropologists.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It stripped too much away in the abstraction and in what they were doing. And so they kind of like lost the meaning behind a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've started thinking about like trees as alive, and it makes them make more sense.
What do you mean?
Or I don't know, like I've stopped thinking about things as not alive and some things as alive, and then all of them make more sense.
Like they're playing a role in like a play or something like that.
Yeah. And they're and you're like, yeah, how could it be another way? It's either all alive or none of it's alive. That's the way I'm thinking about it. And at least I'm alive, so all of it's alive.
Huh. That's what I thought. Yeah, there's a footnote where he quotes people about like the intricate like nature of like the roles of different things in nature, like sunlight and hills and valleys and water, and they use that to like show God's mercy and that God is necessary to be providing these things that rationalists would rule out if they were creating the world and had their own master plan played out. They would overlook and oversimplify things, and they would get rid of things that look like they're a problem, but then in turn actually like provide some kind of utility that you don't see in the complexity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he kind of ends up going with this theme for most of the rest of the conclusion. And well, he says that prior to the 17th century being, what he really means there is Descartes, the switch with Descartes, is truth was what had not been disproved, or prior to the 17th century, truth was seen as what had not been disproved rather than what had been proved.
Yeah.
So this is I think that the intuition of what we think is so great about the Enlightenment is very different if you formulate it differently. So Descartes' formulation, the intuition is we don't want to believe false things and we want to believe true things. And sometimes you've got to think for yourself if you want to do that. You can't just accept what everyone tells you. That's the basic intuition of the Enlightenment. That everyone thinks is there. But aside from all the specifics of whatever theories that did happen, the intuition is, hey, let's start thinking for ourselves a bit. And so Descartes' principle was going to be, I'm going to prove everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to believe nothing and then prove things. Whereas James he solves the same intuition, but he does it in the exact opposite way, where he says, I'm going to believe everything and then start cutting things out.
Yeah.
Which I think is way better. Or it's actually what you'd call open-minded. Whereas Descartes said, oh, I don't like all this, everyone telling me what to do. I don't like Aristotle. So I'm going to stop believing. I'm going to believe less things. And now Descartes, of course, built himself out of the hole and like re-rationalized Catholicism and whatever. But it's way, I think that James's way is way better and way more honest.
Yeah, it allows for more things and understands like our shortcomings in our rationalism.
Mm-hmm. And this quote that you have here, was this actually James or was he quoting someone else?
I believe it was James, but it might have been someone else, but I think it was him. But it's a long quote, but it's at least, it talks about religious people or people in general using things like the promise of the dawn, the voice of the thunder, these descriptive, like anthropomorphic, like animized ways of talking about nature that still exist, that people of religious mindsets are more inclined to. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he talks about the voice of thunder and the promise of a rainbow. That was always a weird story. Why is that? Why did he put, like as a kid you just accept it, like yeah, he's promising us with a rainbow. But
Yeah.
What does that mean for you to see a promise through a rainbow? I'm not sure. Or sublimity. So like the sublime is almost impossible to describe without this kind of thing. Yeah, the one way that he describes it here and someone else describes it somewhere else is mere weather. If you don't think of the nature like this, everything is weather. It's like the same thing as weather. And then every once in a while, maybe if you believe in it, there's a miracle. But that's just like an add-on.
Yeah.
But and he kind of says this here, that the personal forces in the world are real, despite what the depersonalizing force may be. You know, what the depersonalizers want to do with it. The personal forces are there and they're real.
Yeah.
And so science has a role in a way in that obviously science has, and he was not against science, even the way that it was progressing at the time by any means, in that scientific objects, what the theories that we develop, those are abstractions that are tools that we use to interact with the world and develop in it in a certain way. But they themselves are abstractions, and they might feel more concrete because they're based on experiments or something like that, but the actual science itself is not concrete. The more personal way of understanding the world is far more concrete, and it's better to build the science around that than to build that around the science, because then you're trying to describe concrete things based on an abstract thing rather than, basically he's saying what they call wishy-washy is far less wishy-washy because people actually live it. Yeah. Reality wouldn't be the same without living reality.
Yeah. The subjective. ties everything together. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess he does say here that because our ancestors made so many errors of fact and mixed them with religion, that we should therefore leave off being religious at all. I guess he's saying we don't want to. I guess he is kind of saying that, oh well, people in the past made a bunch of some kind of mistake about
Yeah.
religion, which it's unclear what specific claims he's talking about there. But it's definitely not the ones you think. It might be like, oh, if we put like rocks in a circle, then like whatever, this is gonna happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
this is like, we don't necessarily have to disbelieve everything just because errors have been made. And then he kind of like, he talks back around to how some of the things that people thought were in a footnote, at least he was talking about how things that people had thought being crazy are now actually things that are being picked up by science as being like viable or real. He brings up hypnosis as one of them. And then some other stuff that still hasn't been confirmed, but he brings it up as like things, even though they might seem like they've been ruled out, aren't necessarily ruled out. He goes, the final human opinion may, in short, in some manner now impossible to foresee, revert to a more personal style, just as any path of progress may follow a spiral rather than a straight line.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Was it on here that I talked to, this reminded me of, I always go back to this in my head, this time that Ricky Gervais was on the Tonight Show, whatever one that Colbert does now.
Yeah.
Is it the Tonight Show?
Probably.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It's what used to be Letterman. So I guess
yeah,
that's the Tonight Show.
Show. Yeah.
So, and he and Colbert is like famously Catholic, but also kind of not. Kind of like he does it for show a little bit.
He's a bad Catholic. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Ricky Gervais came on, and he's known for being, very atheist. I really don't like. He really rubbed me the wrong way. But he said something like, if we reset the world right now, all of the science books would come back the same, and all of the religious books would come back different.
Yep, I've heard that.
And I think that, well, it depends what he means by resetting the world, right? Obviously. But if he means something like, okay, the law of gravity, this is a general rule, and that one's not going to go away, whatever. He seems to have already in his mind made a split between scientific kinds of things to say and religious kinds of things to say. And then we're just going to, when he says reset, he implicitly means we're going to keep the scientific ones the same and the religious ones different. That's what he really means. So he kind of assumes his answer in the framing of the question. Mm-hmm. But if he means, like, what is most of the Bible? Most of the Bible is history. So if the history is going to be different, then the Bible's going to be different, right? Because the Bible is the history of God relating with the world. So if it's different, it's different. Yeah. Like, I don't know what you want us to do. And then if you say, oh, well, if the Bible is different, it would be different. That's all he really said. And then also, I don't even know if the scientific texts would be the same, because science has developed also through history. So basically, what you're going to ask him is history going to be different or is it not? And if it is, then both science and religion are different. And if it's not, then science and religion are going to be the same.
Yeah.
So it's very, they really, really, when you look at it like just a little bit longer, it's like ridiculous how much they presume themselves, Like I was just watching the South Park Go God Go episodes. The one where Cartman wants to get a Wii, so he freezes himself for 400 years.
Yeah, the atheist one where there's like three atheist alliances.
Yeah, because that was a big thing with the New Atheists, was like, oh well, people fight over religion, but it's basically nothing. So if we get rid of religion, we get rid of meaningless fighting, right?
Yeah.
And turns out that's not true. That was part of the point of the episode, is they just start fighting over the name of what's a cooler name, United Atheist Alliance or the Atheist World League or something like that.
I think there were three. One was run by like
And then one was the Beavers.
The Beavers.
Yeah, because like evolution is like their thing. So yeah. I mean that was a great episode.
It was.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue. He says intellectualism in religion can make it shallow. I agree. We don't need to go too much into that, I guess. And then he very much emphasizes the strength of the religion is in the individual. And the reason that he does this, I think, is because he wants to emphasize experience, and that you need to look at people's experiences and the way that they live them, and that requires individuals and an individual vision. But it's not the main. It's not. He's not actively denying kind of community things, but he really just has not talked about them in the book, and I don't think he's really thinking about them. But the reason that he wants to emphasize them is so that he can emphasize the experiences.
Yeah, but I think he does kind of miss out on the opportunity to talk about group experience more and how that like affects religious experience, and how religion is shaped by community interactions. And so I think it's also easier to have that individualism from a Protestant standpoint than from like an Orthodox standpoint, where I think you get more of that body of Christ feeling when you're doing a liturgy than when like going to a sermon at a non-denom church.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or that is it's very exciting in the room, but it's hyper individual in another way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about what you take away from the sermon or what you take away from the service, as opposed to like what you're participating in as a group, is kind of like how I've felt the differences between like things at a Baptist church as opposed to when I was going to like Truro, an Anglican church, or the Orthodox church that we go to. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The best part of the Truro service is always the procession too, you know?
Yeah.
That's always awesome.
Pretty intense.
But it's so short. It's like a burst.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Procession. I think processions are always cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like a part of a like people respect those at weddings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone gets to be, well, not everyone, I guess, but like many people like look forward to their own wedding. So nobody wants to get rid of the tradition where everyone's looking at them for a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
Like nobody, we're gonna desecrate holidays forever, but nobody's gonna get rid of birthdays.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I mean, people like the parts of the traditions where the focus was on them. Yeah. Okay. What's next? I think he does the simplified version of all religions, that something is wrong and that it can be set right. Mm-hmm. That's also that he brings that up in the Will to Believe too. That's his definition in Will to Believe.
Yeah.
And a little bit later in the Moral Philosopher and Moral Life. That's my real favorite, James. I'm gonna get to that soon. Yeah. And then also kind of that all religions affirm that God exists, or that something higher is better in some way. That's actually that's more how he frames it in actually, now that I think about it, the uneasiness and the deliverance, that's not how he frames things in the Will to Believe. In Will to Believe, he frames it that there's a better version, there's a higher, better version of things, or the more eternal things are better, and that fact has practical relevance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that might be a better way of looking at it.
Yeah, I like that formulation better because
Yeah.
this is way too simple to me.
And he does say that basically all religions affirm that God exists, acts, and people are better off trusting God. And I don't know if that's right. I don't think in Buddhism, Confucianism, or Taoism you get that. I don't
I
think
think
God,
he says that, doesn't he?
maybe, but I think he kind of overlooks how many people are Buddhist, Taoist, or Confucius, because that's
He
like
does. He does
a
say
lot
at
of
some
people.
point, like, I don't know anything about Buddhism, so anything that I'm wrong about Buddhism, like, sorry.
He brings up karma at some point, but it's not.
He brings up yoga at some point.
Yeah. Um, yeah, but I know in
Yeah.
Buddhism you're like trying to like be one with the whole again. And so and kind of that in Hinduism too. So it's kind of different and you don't have God acting in that as much. I don't
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure God doesn't act in Buddhism or even that there is a God in Buddhism, and then definitely not in Taoism or Confucianism.
Or
Um,
Hinduism. Hinduism is a little bit more complicated, and I think Hinduism
yeah,
has a very different history than most religions.
yeah,
But you
yeah,
know,
it's a long, complicated history, and
because did you know that C.S. Lewis also almost became Hindu?
I don't think you can become Hindu.
What do you mean?
I I don't think like non-Indian people could be Hindu.
Really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Like, I don't want to get this wrong, but I took a class and we covered Hinduism for like 2 weeks, and he was like, "Yeah, you can't." My professor was like, "Yeah, you can't convert in. Like, it's an ethnocentric religion where, like, you're not even in the caste system if you're not Indian."
What are
Um,
you? Are you a non-person, or are you
yeah,
a?
yeah, you're out, completely outside the system, so you want to be reborn into the caste system.
Oh, whoa!
So the only
So
way that you can join is by dying.
that's kick-ass.
I think. I'm not 100% sure, um, but
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
yeah,
Um,
maybe you can
cool.
join through marriage. I don't know.
Maybe. Well,
Maybe.
maybe I'll try that. The Okay, so then he kind of hits us with his semi-conclusion.
Hmm.
So his three main points that his conclusions of the essay. We'll just go through them one by one. One, the subconscious self intermediates between nature and the higher region. And this is what he was talking about a little bit in the last chapter with the subliminal. Not meaning lesser or less real or more confusing, but it's just the not exactly normal, everyday, dirt pushing activities. You know, um, just because it's subconscious doesn't mean it's like, oh, it's all a mental trick or it's wrong. It's just not. It's just a little bit under the surface.
Yeah.
It's like a fingernail away, but it's there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's something that he finds somewhat about all religions, I suppose, or the all religious experience.
Yeah.
And then he kind of calls the higher region God. He doesn't specify. He doesn't mind if you specify, but he doesn't specify. And that when you do commune with that, you have a sense of direction, and the idea that higher realm cares for you, or that you're a part of it, and it pays attention to you. You're not just inconsequential to it, right? And then the third, that unseen world affects the seen world. The invisible and the visible have a relationship that has visible effects. You
Yeah.
know? So those three things together are kind of his semi-conclusion of the book. based on, I mean, he's said way more things than that, I think, but this is like from a scientist perspective. He's like, from my survey of experience, this is what people experience in religious experiences.
Yeah.
Just from a survey of the data. But then he goes into the postscript. This was not part of the lectures. And he's like, okay, people were just satisfied with that ending. Here's a good ending.
Yeah.
Like, you haven't finished, you never watched Sopranos, right? The Sopranos?
Yeah.
But has Hayden finished it, do you know?
No, he's never. I don't know if he's ever going to finish that.
Oh, yeah, because he watched the ending.
Watch the ending. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It's kind of like the ending of The Sopranos. People didn't like it. I liked it. Actually, it was quite a good ending. That's an ending that people complain about that they should not have complained about. But it's like the ending of Game of Thrones. Well, that's not gonna do it. But yeah. So what he does is he also kind of says a little bit of his views, but he makes these very strange claims that I really am interested in. These are like some of the most interesting parts. So we'll say first he comes up with a couple of distinctions. You have either the naturalists and the supernaturalists. Naturalists believe that basically just the visible world is real, and the supernaturalists believe in the visible world and the greater super visible order, right?
Yeah.
And then he comes up with another binary, the refined and crass, right?
Yeah.
Where the refined supernaturalists believe in this unseen order, but the crease between the natural and the supernatural are very distinct, right? So maybe things in the supernatural are watching us, or they're there, and maybe they care about us, or they're interested in us, but they're not related to us, or we can't exactly enter into communion with them.
There's
right?
no interaction between the two spheres. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They're higher, but they're not connected.
Mm-hmm.
They're just kind of in a bubble above us. This is really, I think, what Klein's joy is.
Yeah, it is.
Is refined supernaturalism.
Mm-hmm.
And then crass supernaturalism is, there's these two zones, and they shoot lasers at each other. You know? And so he says essentially, I'm coming down on the side of crass supernaturalism is real, but I don't know exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. Right? But whatever it is, it's in that category, because it's a supernatural kind of thing where people relate to the higher zone, and they interact with it, and it interacts with them, and it's a back and forth. And when his example of refined supernaturalism is Kant, and I haven't read much Kant, but you can think of someone that believes in like a set of moral laws, and as someone that wants to refer to the higher zone, but they don't actually interact with the higher zone. Yeah. Right? So one of Kant's famous phrases is that he had a vision where he analogized the moral order to constellations, right? So if you can imagine, we're on Earth and there's the heavens, and you go up and you look at the heavens and you find out your moral direction from the heavens. Not that they're telling you anything, it's just always there what those moral guides and principles are, and then you just take them and apply them on Earth. But that's just, I think it's a little bit of Gnosticism too.
Yeah.
Is a little bit more like refined supernaturalism. I don't know too much about Gnosticism. Yeah, and
so he talks about how like universalistic supernaturalism, it cedes a lot of ground to naturalism in that you don't really expect any difference in the natural world from a universalistic supernatural position, because you have that definite crease between the natural world and the spiritual world, you don't really expect the natural world to behave any differently than it would in a like secular materialist world. And so it doesn't give any or a whole lot of place for spiritual life within the natural world.
It lends itself to science then.
Yeah.
I think maybe, I don't know enough about Spinoza either, but maybe some people would say Spinoza was like this. And Einstein, I think, considered himself a Spinozist. So maybe there's that too. I'm not really too sure. But oh, and he said, is this the section where he says that God is finite, or God might be finite?
So he says that there isn't evidence that God isn't finite. And so he's like, yeah, there's really like, no one's really doing this where people believe that God is finite. And there's not really anything that good comes from that belief, but we can't prove that it's not true. And so he doesn't rule it out.
Mm-hmm. And the but it's there. I think there's somewhere else where he goes more into that, and it's important to realize that what he means by that is by finite he means that there are things that God is not. So he basically means non-pantheism when he says that God is finite.
Yeah, and he gets into his pantheism a little bit more, or his polytheism a little bit at the end.
Yeah, and this kind of polytheism that he's talking about here, I think, is more what we've talked about with monolitrism.
Yeah.
But he's calling it polytheism, and since Protestants don't really have an understanding of any, they have, like, if you ask Protestants about demons and angels, they'll just go like, most will just go like, yeah, I guess. Yeah, there are demons and angels. But it's not like believed that they're present or doing anything or are like part of the story per se, because there's no tradition of them from after the Bible, so they don't really seem relevant, right?
Yeah.
But to say that you don't believe in them would seem like you're contradicting the Bible, so they can't really say that.
You can't do that either, yeah.
So usually they're just shrugged. But so that's the kind of monotheism that James is thinking about. But the real world, the way that it was traditionally seen in Christianity even, is that yes, there is a God at the top, but and some parts maybe do like break away, and they like break away from creation forever, away from his purposes into sin. But and that's how people, so polytheism, he says, has historically been the religion of the common people, in that is the most practically salient religion, that you understand this is this God over here, this is this God over here. I can worship this one or I can worship this one. There's two paths I can go down. But what made Christianity or monotheism a higher thing is that there is a God here that this one can break away from and go this way. But ultimately, I want to serve the gods that are serving the highest God, or serve the things or principles that are serving the highest God. And then you go, well, but Christians don't talk about serving demigods or something like that. Yeah, well, they kind of do if you depersonalize everything. So just like serving your fields is serving God, because it's a living part of his creation, or animals, or whatever. If you stop depersonalizing things, then everything is a God, or everything is a potential spirit that can connect with him.
Yeah.
Which is more interesting to me than like laws or rules.
Huh. But, I hadn't thought about it like that.
Yeah. So I forgot that's how he ends it, saying like, and polytheism.
Yeah, polytheism. Yeah, he doesn't mention it at all during the entire book, and he's like,
he might, doesn't he? I don't know.
I don't
I
think
don't
so.
remember.
I could have misremembered stuff, but I don't think he does.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
I guess
I think
that's
that's
it.
it.
So we're going to be editing this document and releasing it somewhere somehow.
Yeah.
We'll release it on the site, but we'll edit the document, make it presentable, and then send it for everybody else to read.
Yeah.
Okay. Very
All
good.
righty. Very good.
See you later.